Hello, everybody. We're really happy to have so many people join us in this last week of August, which is the last week of the summer for us here in New England, but may not be for some of you. We are very pleased with the presenters for this webinar. We're focusing on college and career readiness research and have researchers and technical assistance providers from two national centers, one that focuses on high schools and one that focuses on community colleges. And the way we're going to organize this webinar is sequentially. First, Joe Harris from the National High School Center will talk about secondary perspectives. We'll take a break for your questions and answers and discussion with Joe. And then Elizabeth Barnett will present post-secondary research on the topic. And then we'll have questions and answers from you and discussion with Elizabeth. And then Dana has an opportunity to respond as a practitioner. And then we have an open discussion time to think about the research across the two perspectives and implications for our work. And I'm looking forward to that because we have such a diverse audience. I think that will be very interesting. So let's move in. I'm going to do a little background on the regional laboratories. And tell you that we here at REL-NEI, the Northeastern Islands, are part of a network of 10 regional labs across the country. We are a link between research and evaluation and practice and policy. And our goal is to increase the use of evaluation and data to work through problems and strategies and learn from initiatives that are going on. We're funded by the U.S. Department of Education in their Institute for Evaluation Services. REL-NEI serves the Northeastern Islands region, and we're pleased that people from so many of the states and islands in our jurisdiction are part of this webinar today. And in this round of, let me say this about our partners. We're headquartered here at EDC in Massachusetts. We have major partners of learning innovations at WestEd. That's the WestEd's Massachusetts office, and the American Institutes for Research in Washington, D.C. This contract just began in January and goes for 5 years. In this contract, most of our work is going through research alliances such as this one. And REL-NEI has 8 research alliances on different topics. Each one of them includes a different arrangement and categories of practitioners and policymakers. For example, we are focusing in the Northeast College and Career Readiness Research Alliances on the 7 Northeastern states and focused at the SEA level primarily. We have partner research alliances on related topics in the U.S. Virgin Islands, focusing on college and career readiness, and in Puerto Rico, focused on dropout prevention. So I'm hoping that we have some people from those alliances here. And our other alliances, again, are on different topics. Some of them include more district-level people. Some of them include a variety. The Northeast College and Career Readiness Research Alliance has developed a goal collaboratively with our partners. And what I want to focus you on is that we'll be doing research to support the work of those 7 states. We're not making up our own goals or research. It will be in order to support the work that the states have begun and will continue to be doing. And we're focusing primarily on increasing graduation rates and ensuring students' readiness for college and the workforce. The goal of this webinar is to look at the research both at the secondary level and at the post-secondary level about college and career readiness. We've heard that there often are different interpretations of what readiness means from high school people, and then when kids get to college, different different interpretations of what readiness is, and we're going to discuss issues that arise in both kinds of institutions related to that topic. And then we'll also give you a little bit of information about our research alliance. So let's start as a practice for polls. We'll be doing a few polls here. What jurisdiction are you representing today? That is, what state or one of the islands are you representing? And you can click here. Thank you. You can scroll down on the right if you're not seeing your state or island. So while most of our participants are from the Northeast, we do have guests from other parts of the country, and we welcome you to this. So Chantel, can we go back? Thanks. And do you primarily work with secondary schools or post-secondary schools, or maybe you work with both? So more secondary, but a lot of you work with both. Thank you for that. It looked like a pretty diverse group when we looked at the registration list. So I think there'll be something for everybody here. We're going to begin with Joe Harris, which is a National Research and Technical Assistance Center funded by the U.S. Department of Education. It's located at AIR, American Institutes for Research. And Joe's focus has been on college and career readiness, dropout prevention, and integrating special and general education instruction. He also has done a lot of work for over 10 years on major technical assistance contracts funded by the National Science Foundation to promote STEM education across the country. And I will now turn it over to Joe to begin. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm checking first to see if I can advance the slides and also double checking to see that my mute button isn't on, because some of the most brilliant things I've said previously always happen when the mute button is on. I take it by your laugh that you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Great. So thanks to you, Leslie, and thanks to the Northeast REL and the CCR Research Alliance for providing this opportunity for what I hope will be a rich and fruitful discussion. My role is to set up the stage for this discussion and share some of the secondary research and challenges we face in pursuing a research-based approach to college and career readiness. So, as you indicated, the RELs are part of, or the New England REL. Let's see if...
Northeast and Islands, please.
Sorry, I'm actually about to...
I knew you were working, so I thought I'd give you a time to fiddle with your slides.
Okay, here we go. Actually, there is a New England Regional Comprehensive Center that does work directly with the network that I'm part of. This keeps jumping back to the first slide. Let me see if I can get everything to come on the screen, and I'll talk about it at one time. So we're part, if you see in the center part, the National High School Center is part of a collaborative network of 16 regional comprehensive centers that in turn work with state education agencies and LEAs. And we also do that work in collaboration with a set of OSEP, TA, and D centers. Those are the Office of Special Education Programs and their Technical Assistance and Dissemination Centers. And with the start of the new proposal, and I think the new contract period for the RELs, and going forward, I think there's going to be a lot more collaboration between the regional comprehensive centers and content centers and the regional labs, as well as other TA providers. But there's also a larger network out there that deals with college and career readiness, and we refer to as the College and Career Readiness Technical Assistance Center, and that includes TA and service providers, both for-profit and nonprofit, resource developers, research centers, and other stakeholder and advocacy groups. And I put all these on the screen for a purpose, and that's to demonstrate this is just the TA network. This doesn't include all the other types of things that are going on related to college and career readiness, and already shows how complex and confusing the college and career readiness landscape has become. Again, because you also have to add all the varieties of post-secondary institutions and organizations, so as you can imagine, it gets more and more complicated along the way. The use of research and applied to college and career readiness, I should say that one place where there's plenty of data and research is in identifying the crisis we're facing. With the graduation rate hovering around 70%, with 25% of students needing more than 4 years to graduate, and with only 1/3 to 1/4 of high school seniors deemed proficient in reading mathematics, it's clear we have a problem. There's also clearly not just a problem getting kids to go through and successfully graduate high school, but then to be ready to go on to college and workforce as well. So this challenge is confirmed by a recent ACT data that only 1/4 of their test takers met all 4 of what they call their college and career readiness benchmarks, and slightly more than 1/4 didn't meet any of them. And this is data that's pretty much the same as the previous year. This report just came out, I think, about a week ago. Now, Elizabeth's going to talk about this in depth, so I'm going to skip over and talk more specifically about the workforce. Surveys of employers indicate that the recruits lack basic skills and the ability to apply them through analysis, synthesis, and other higher order thinking skills. And unfortunately, that college students don't do much better than high school graduates who enter the workforce directly. Meanwhile, on the economic and job forecasting side, 2/3 of all jobs and 9 in 10 high-wage jobs in the next decade will require some post-secondary training in the future. To look at it another way, for those that prefer visual graphics, in 1973, 72% of the 91 million workers required a high school diploma or less. That's those 2 purple boxes on the left. And that number had dropped almost in half to 41% of 154 million workers in 2007. The bottom line is we're hemorrhaging students. Far too many students who do make it through high school are unprepared for college or work, and these problems are only going to get worse. So it's not surprising that college and career readiness has become a key education priority. As you can see, there's a variety of federal initiatives and also that lead into local implementation initiatives that focus on some aspect of college and career readiness. The Common Core Standards efforts that include not only the Common Core state standards, but next generation science standards, what are now called the Common Career Technical Core that were released about a month ago, and new efforts in social studies and the arts. The challenge of measuring standards or measuring these various degrees of readiness as indicated through these standards is really being tested now by PARC and Smarter Balance and organizations like ACT's Next Generation College and Career Readiness Assessment System. And then I should add that in addition to all this, there will be a new College and Career Readiness and Success Center beginning October 1st that will be working with the refunded regional comprehensive centers. So one of the beginning places where the problems exist is the agreement over what college and career readiness actually means. It's not surprising that there's still a lot of confusion and even some degree of disagreement about what the meaning is. In fact, this word cloud you see in front of you comes from 10 different definitions of college and career readiness that the High School Center was able to uncover earlier in the spring. Current reform efforts are honing in on preparing all students to graduate on time, prepared for the rigors of college and career. But again, the question becomes, what do we mean by all students? What do we mean by on time? Does all students include students with disabilities or English language learners? Is on time 4 years or 5 years? In fact, even the term college has become a proxy for a full range of post-secondary learning options, including a certificate, a 2-year college degree, 4-year degree, advanced degree, and even just coursework or training. Let's take a look, let's pause for a minute, and using the polling aspect, take a look at what the varying interpretations or perspectives are in our audience today. So can you go ahead and put on the poll, and want everyone to choose an answer around what you think college and career readiness involves. So we can see the consensus is around, well, not surprisingly, that there's some difference, but that it's closer to them being mostly the same or some different than very different or not different at all. So that's an interesting perspective, and I think it's similar. I mean, one thing we all agree on, whether you agree whether that college and career readiness are somewhat the same or very different, is that there's an enduring belief that the goal of public education is to provide all students with rigorous education no matter what their probable destination, and that all students should be adequately prepared for college. This statements you see in front of you, I'm going to pause for a second so you can read them all. Just wanted to let you know that these are statements that were made by the Committee of 10 that was formed by the National Education Association. The committee came together in December of 1892, broke itself into 9 pathways to discuss the various aspects of the various subject areas and course sequences. They even made recommendations about the time allotments for teaching each of the courses and the types of assessment. In fact, the work of this committee has been attributed to the birth of what we call a liberal arts education concept. Unfortunately, about 10 years after this, or a little over 10, in 1918, almost 20 years after this committee had made this major change in the direction of secondary and education, a new committee was formed, and they released a report called the Cardinal Principles of Secondary Education, and this report was based on 2 premises: that most new high school students were less intelligent than their previous generation, and secondly, that they lacked the intellectual ability, will, or means to attend college, thus the birth of a curriculum differentiation, comprehensive high schools, and what later became what we all refer to as tracking. So that's what it looks like. That's what we're facing. That's what we need to try to be doing. And in order to do that, I mean, clearly what we need to be talking about is, and thinking about, is not only what the research currently says, but going forward, what are the types of research we should be approaching and focusing on. The challenge that we have been facing as the National High School Center and looking at the research is to try to make method out of all the madness. Who's doing what, not just in research, but in practice? Where are they focusing? And what we've come up with, and we want to share with you today, is something that we call the College and Career Development Organizer. It's a taxonomy that enables us to figure out who's doing what in these, and what research exists in these various areas. Starting first of all with the goals and expectation, that refer to the final destination that each student is undertaking as an ultimate career goal, the pathways and supports about what they need to do and how do they get there, and finally, the outcomes and measures, how we know and how do we prove to others when students have arrived at their college or career destination. So let's take a talk real briefly about some of the research in each of these areas. The first strand being goals and expectations. And I should say for a moment that when we talk about these strands, we don't talk about them sequentially. We call them strands because we want to give the idea of a DNA strand where they're intertwined, or a rope strand where they're intertwined and interact on a regular basis. So the first strand being goals and expectations, core content component is in its early adoption stages and the implementation process. So unfortunately, it's hard to find a lot of research, and that's ideally an area that you'll see me refer to going later on as a strong recommendation for future research. Under college and career goal setting, which is the second component in the Pathways content thread, goal setting can range from general to very specific, but in both cases, goal setting research has proven to be a relatively strong predictor of future behavior. For example, the EPIC Policy Improvement Center, which is headed by David Conley at the University of Oregon, found that high school seniors whose goals included attending a four-year university were 28% more likely to apply to college than students with no aspirations to attend college. Moreover, students whose goals included earning an advanced degree were 34% more likely to apply to college than students without such goals. Another area that research has identified is the social and emotional skills and the importance in their contribution to a positive contribution to students' acquisition of academic content, and that these same social emotional skills also prove essential to student success in college and career. And there are multiple studies that enforce this point. Research also suggests that students with higher levels of self-determination skills are more likely to have positive adult outcomes, including holding a job, having a bank account, and living on their own. In the pathways and support strands, while some students require more intensive intervention to ensure that college and career readiness goals and expectations can be met, all students benefit from some degree of individualized attention. And this is based on research by the National Center on Response to Intervention in Tomlinson. The growing expert opinion and consensus is that all students need access to rigorous instruction and core content, regardless of post-secondary goals. And rigorous instruction, another focus has been by Edelman, Whitehurst, and others, is that rigorous instruction in core content areas, especially in mathematics, has been found to be highly predictive of student success, a successful completion of a bachelor's degree. Many high schools provide rigorous learning experience. In fact, I think Dana, before this started, Dana was talking about some of the things his district is doing in partnership with local community colleges to offer these kinds of opportunities. And these opportunities have been proven to help students save time and money when enrolled in college, as well as offer students a broader range of academic and technical courses. The final area that I wanted to share was outcomes and measures. There's been a lot of research recently at the University of Chicago, the Chicago Consortium on School Research, around on-track indicators, which is the first thread in the outcomes and measures strand. And many of these have been used to look and are starting to be used to look and move from the use of indicators that are early warning systems for dropout to indicators that are predictive of student success in college. For example, only 41% of students who stated that they were interested in post-secondary education completed the application and enrollment process at four-year institutions prior to high school graduation. So we start to see Roderick and others looking at predictive indicators of student success in college. However, I should say, in some of the work the High School Center has been doing recently with David Connolly and others, he cautions very much against cut point indicators for college success. So time is zooming by, so let me quickly jump to and share with you and close by recommending some challenges to the Alliance to build a CCR action research agenda that captures and builds on key elements of the research and bodies of knowledge that have defined much of the secondary school improvement efforts over the past decade. From communities of practice, we see an active involvement of stakeholders from the start and ongoing engagement in problem-solving efforts as a key element of this process. A common vision of setting and understanding of context through internal and external environmental scans is a contribution from strategic planning, building on prior research and maintaining fidelity and replicating what works from rigorous research, and recognizing the timely and focused use of data and the importance of that, and being cautious not to flood teachers and others with too much data that they can't possibly use, and again, trying to focus a little bit more on the formative use of data. And finally, from systemic reform, remembering that high school reform and that college and career readiness are part of a broader system that requires a comprehensive approach to capacity building that looks at not just teachers, but all members of the workforce and their professional development needs, and focuses on aligning and leveraging the resources, especially in the troubled times we face. So I want to share a few suggestions for future research opportunities that I hope we can see emerging over the next year or so. First one I mentioned earlier, beginning with, is we're putting a lot of weight and a lot of focus on the Common Core state standards as proxies for college and career readiness. So one of the first challenges of research moving forward will be to look at the impact of, if this is really an accurate assessment of the value of the Common Core state standards. Secondly, the role of state education agencies, LEAs, and school leaders that are unfolding and changing over time, and I'm sure Dana will remark on some of the challenges that he faces as a high school principal in this stronger focus on college and career readiness. Thirdly, the important role of interventions that effectively support college and career readiness, and especially how to correctly match those interventions with the specific needs of students, and then again, how to use data more effectively, moving from early warning of at-risk students more toward predictive indicators, and then the validity of the emerging alternative pathways. And finally, an area that I hope we can talk about a little bit more today is the effective role of and engagement of parents, post-secondary institution, and other key stakeholders. So that's the formal part of my presentation. I do want to invite you all to visit the High School Center website. We have publications related to college and career readiness, especially around our organizer, and a brief on each of the three areas I very briefly discussed, that you can find more information and more examples of research and visiting our website or participating in any of our social media outlets. So Leslie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Joe. You raised a lot of issues, and people in the chat room have raised some questions as well. So let's start with one or two of those. And if others have questions, you can write them in the chat room or raise your hand with the little person up at the top of the chat room. So one, Joe, is you talked about research and a number of issues in the broad sense. Are there implications for those for teaching practice? And I'm assuming this is primarily at the high school level, but and you can address it at the high school level.
Well, certainly. I think the biggest implication has to be, if we're looking at rigorous pathways for all students, the recognition that the dominant lecture model that has been the paradigm for high school teaching for probably 100 years has to give way to a more truly differentiated instructional approach, not in the negative sense that I mentioned earlier by the compact, but in a very positive sense where we can, where teachers facilitate the learning process, don't become the center of teaching content.
Okay. And a related question, what are the key differences between the findings from two NRC reports, the 21st Century Skills Report and the K-12 Science Standards?
Really, I'm going to have to pass on that question because I'm not clear. I'm not clear on the question, and frankly, I don't feel that I know either of the report. I'm aware of the reports, but I'm not comfortable talking about them.
Okay. Any other questions from participants? So I'll just read this. I'm concerned about standardization as opposed to the contextual situated learning and relationships between real teachers with real students. I also wonder about support for practitioner research where teachers apply and generate theories in their classrooms. So I think the issue is between the balance or the challenge of both standardization, which you can see in standardized testing and those standards-based instruction, and contextual, individualized teaching.
Well, I think a big fear in that process, or a big concern or flag in that process, it has to be how much of that contextual instruction and standardized instruction is delivered in isolation of either a teacher or teacher facilitator, or in isolation of other students. I think what we need to see more and more of, and I think there's a valuable concern, is opportunities that target the needs of individual students, but do it in the context of a broader collaboration. I mean, even if you look in the career side or CTE side, more of a problem-solving or problem-based learning approach, more of work-based learning opportunities, I think we'll take it in the other direction, away from the idea that everybody just sit at their desk and do a set of assignments or Khan Academy reviews without any type of interaction or opportunities for collaboration. I mean, I think it's what we're proposing, or what's being proposed in terms of a more interactive approach to college and career readiness and a more individualized pathways is a double-edged sword. We have to be careful to make sure that in that process we don't isolate students from the interactive process. But I would challenge that the lecture approach that has been the dominant approach, and the didactic instruction approach that has been the dominant approach, has only worked for a small portion of the classroom. That's what the data shows. The only difference between now and when I was in school, when tracking was dominant, was that there were career opportunities for students in any of the tracks, and many of those career opportunities provided sustainable living wages. Nowadays, that option doesn't exist, which requires us to make sure that everyone in the classroom succeeds.
And there was a follow-up question or a question that directly relates to some of the strategies you're talking about. Can you talk about the research on project-based learning? Is there research that shows students who do project-based learning do well on standardized testing?
I mean, I can find it, and I would invite someone, the person who asked that question, to email me at jharris air@air.org or email the high school center. I unfortunately don't have it in front of me, but of course, again, this is a situation, in some ways it's an answer to the previous discussion about the isolating effects of research. I think the isolating effects of individualizing instruction to the extreme. Clearly, there is a need for collaborative learning opportunities. I mentioned the report from the conference board that indicated that students in the workforce don't come to the workforce with those kind of collaborative skills that are necessary in today's work environment, and so looking at project-based learning and other opportunities does provide a way to grow those skills. There is, by the way, some work going on, and I would recommend that the person look at Linked Learning in California. It's a pathways approach that includes project-based learning and work-based learning as a central organizing feature. They have had some evaluation of their work that shows definite success in the approach of linked learning and project-based learning and work-based learning. So that would be the first place I would go to identify some of the research that's out there that supports that approach.
And I can say a little about that because I did a search last year on this subject. So there's a fair amount of research at the college level on project and problem-based learning that shows effectiveness of learning outcomes, and a fair amount at both the middle and high school level on science instruction and students learning comparable content through a project-based learning approach. So I could send those as well, and lhergert@edc.org. But send that as a question and we can respond. We're keeping track. Someone asked about references, and we're keeping track of the issues that people, that either Joe mentioned or in the future that Elizabeth mentioned, and we'll send out references to everyone on the list. So I think we're ready to move along. As often is the case here, we raise as many issues as we answer, but this is a kind of topic that's the blending of college and career issues, preparation issues, is something that we're just grappling with now. It has been sort of separated in the past, and at this point we're trying to make sure that all of our students achieve the same standards, albeit in different ways and with different pathways, and are ready for both college and career. And at the college level, people are finding different kinds of things, or attacking issues in different ways than we often do at the high school level. So we're going to turn it now over to Elizabeth Barnett from the Community College Research Center, which is part of the National Center for Postsecondary Research at Columbia University. And her research interests have related to both high school to college transition and community colleges themselves, access to college, workforce education, and institutional change around those issues. She's done work on early college high schools and dual enrollment, on tech prep, and a number of other strategies and programs and initiatives that address some of these issues. So Elizabeth, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sound good.
Okay, good. Well, I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon, and thank you, Joe. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm going to look at this topic from the post-secondary perspective, and of course, it's a huge topic. So I'm being selective in what I share with you. But I have organized it around the three areas that Joe's center uses when looking at college and career readiness. So goals and expectations, pathways and support, and outcomes and measures. And for each of these topics, I've included a poll, and then I'll share a few pieces of research that I thought people in this group might find interesting. So with regard to the first topic, so, looking at goals and expectations, here's a poll for you. Which definition of college readiness do you consider to be the most useful? Okay, it looks like we're heading toward a majority who are considering success in the first college level course in a subject area to be the best indicator, with some others selecting other options. Basically, all of these definitions are in use, and a lot depends on what you're using the definition for. For the most part, the uses tend to be measurement, placement into college, guidance for high schools, but it also depends on who's driving the definition. And colleges generally think that they should be driving it, that college readiness should be established by the post-secondary sector. So can I get the slides back? There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about 3 questions and what the research says about it. First of all, how does higher education define college readiness? How do colleges view the college readiness of current high school graduates? And how much of an overlap is there between college readiness and career readiness? So as far as definitions of college readiness, most of the policy related to higher education is concerned with readiness to engage in first college level courses in a way that sets students on the road to satisfactory progression through college. But the working definition is generally based on placement testing. So placement testing that would allow students to place into college level courses or else into remediation in math, reading, or writing. And so these are typically single tests with cut scores that place students at college level or 1, 2, or up to 3 levels below in remedial sections in college. However, there are a lot of people in both secondary and post-secondary education that do take a much more nuanced view of what goes into being prepared for college. And Joe referred several times to David Conley and EPIC as a good resource on this area. And I think that they've done very helpful research looking at a range of ways to think about college readiness. They asked college faculty from entry-level courses what their expectations are and came up with a framework that includes 4 areas. One is key content knowledge, which is what we all understand as critical for college students, for high school students to have in order to be prepared for college. But they also talk about key cognitive strategies such as problem solving, being able to think through a research design. There's a list of those. I won't go into the detail. They also talk in terms of key learning skills and techniques. So that involves both student ownership of learning as well as learning techniques such as note-taking, being able to interpret graphs, use a library, those kinds of things. And then their 4th area is key transition knowledge and skills, and that mostly has to do with being able to navigate the college environment. First of all, just basics like how to apply to college, how to apply for financial aid, how to get help when you need it, and then how to get yourself into classes and all the things that students need to know to be successful when they enter college. So when it comes to predictors of college success, perhaps Edelman's work is the most influential. His Toolbox Revisited was done in 2006, And the biggest takeaway from that was that the best predictor of college success was the rigor and intensity of coursework in high school. And that trumped practically every other measure of preparation. So there are different things going on in response to that. I think that research has become quite well known. Jennifer Dunay of ECS has two major recommendations in this area. One is to make sure that there are rigorous high school graduation requirements in terms of the expectations that students take a certain number of courses before graduating. She cites research that talks about some states requiring as few as 13 Carnegie units for high school graduation, with a range going up to 26 units. And there are a lot of states that are working in this area now to make sure that graduation requirements, at least in terms of course expectations, are more rigorous. But the other piece has to do with the courses that are actually available to individual students. So she also cites a body of research that makes clear that low-income minority and rural students are less likely to attend high schools offering math and science courses, and says that data published in March 2012 by the U.S. Office for Civil Rights indicates that courses are generally considered the basis for college readiness, such as Algebra 1, Biology, and Geometry, were not offered in more than 1 out of 10 high schools in the sample. So, clearly there's not equal access to rigorous college courses, and that's an area to work on. So colleges in general are very concerned about the college readiness of current high school graduates. About a quarter of students entering four-year colleges and over half of those entering two-year colleges are placing into developmental education in at least one subject. And I should say that I'm using developmental education and remedial education interchangeably here. So what that means is that those students are going to, first of all, they're going to have to take courses that are essentially at the high school level when they get to college. They're going to have to pay for those. And in some cases, they may not be permitted to progress into college level courses until they've completed them. So for all these reasons, it's likely that their educational progression will be delayed, and the cost to both the students themselves and to society are pretty substantial. So one study estimated the cost at $5.6 billion a year. But it's also discouraging to students many times. They may finish high school and feel that they're ready and have been told that they're ready and that they're, perhaps their grades were fine, and they get to college and find out they have to take these remedial courses. So for a range of reasons, that can be difficult, but it's also a problem because it's associated with lower rates of college completion. And probably that's one of the most motivating factors for colleges to be concerned with the readiness of their graduates. There's a lot of pressure on colleges these days to increase completion rates. In particular, community colleges completion rates are quite low. And students who place into remediation are considerably less likely to finish college. And actually, quite a number of them never finish the remedial sequence to which they're assigned. So one study by Bailey, Zhang, and Cho, they're from our center, the Community College Research Center, indicates that fewer than one-half of the students who are referred to remediation in community colleges actually complete the entire sequence to which they're referred. So colleges are, fairly regularly blaming high schools for not having prepared their students adequately. Although I think there are a number of them that understand all the challenges that high schools face, including the fact that oftentimes they're serving students who have, multiple challenges and disadvantages. So we could say a lot more about that, but let me go on to another question for a moment. So the question, are college and career readiness the same? That's something that Joe talked about a bit too. These days what we're seeing is that there's tending to be a consensus toward thinking that they're either the same or fairly similar. And a lot of this is being based on research that ACT did. They came out with a study in 2006 where they concluded the following. Workplace readiness demands the same level of knowledge and skills as college readiness. While not every student plans to attend college after high school, many of the jobs that can support a family require knowledge and skills comparable to those expected of a first-year college student. So they did a study that essentially showed that if you were aiming for a career at the ONET Zone 3 level or above, and ONET Zone 3 is about the level of electricians, construction workers, upholsterers, and plumbers, and so on, that you were going to need essentially the same skills as the student who was heading toward college. So that's one point of view, and I think that's informed the development of the Common Core standards and a number of people who are thinking about this area. Now, Conley, referring to him again, basically agrees, but he thinks that there are some differences. So he says college readiness means the ability to complete a wide range of gen ed courses, while career readiness refers to readiness for courses specific to an occupational area or certificate, and says that for practical purposes, there may not be much need to separate students into these two groups. One area in the post-secondary world where there are a lot of discussions about differences these days is in math. So there are a number of colleges thinking that perhaps not every student needs to understand algebra to enter every major or pathway. Okay, so now we get into the second topic, which is pathways and supports. So I want to do another poll. So the question is your institution involved in a partnership with someone from K-12 or post-secondary education around any of the following? So I'm thinking if you're in K-12, you would mark whether you're involved with a post-secondary institution and vice versa. Okay, so this is great. There are a lot of places where there's collaboration around student readiness for college. That's excellent. And then quite a lot on sharing information on college readiness expectations. And not too many where there's actual data being shared, as in information on how students are doing. And not too many discussions of preparation for local jobs. So these all potentially can be interesting and important areas of collaboration. Could I have the slides back, please? There is an increasing interest in discussing ways to collaborate most closely. A lot of it is motivated by accountability concerns at colleges. As I mentioned before, the pressure towards making sure that the rates of completion are better, colleges feeling that one way that they can improve completion is to have more students come in college ready. There's also pressures against collaboration that have to do with the lack of resources. Colleges, as in K-12, are feeling more and more pressure to serve students with fewer and fewer resources. But I want to talk a little bit about these three questions. So how are high schools and colleges working together? What evidence supports different approaches to programmatic interventions that are being done in a coordinated way? And why should high school students think about careers? Okay, so I want to share a little bit of research that we did with the National Center for Post-Secondary Research on college readiness partnerships. The research was undertaken in Texas, and we looked at a full range of activities that were done to create co-sponsored programs and initiatives with the aim of having students more college ready. And we found that there were several reasons why this could be a good idea. First of all, there were the opportunities to optimize efforts to improve student outcomes, and this was both in terms of actually improving results and in some cases saving money. So figuring out ways that institutions working together perhaps could do things more efficiently. Colleges were interested in opportunities for student recruitment. Both of them were interested in the opportunity to share best practices. You know, there was some discussion earlier, problem-based learning. That's something that in many cases high schools have figured out more than colleges. There can be discussion back and forth. And then opportunity to create further initiatives that benefit students and institutions. So in many cases, once a relationship was started around maybe a dual enrollment program, there would be discussion about ways to expand into other areas, such as perhaps college readiness workshops or introduction to college majors and pathways. So one thing we found is that there were quite a range of programs, and I encourage you to look at our report on this topic, but for the most part, they fit into two major categories. One was academically focused programs, and the other was college knowledge programs. So academically focused programs were usually intended to help students place out of developmental education in college in math or English. And the college knowledge programs were generally intended to help students understand what how to apply to college, how to do well once they were there. And what we found is that usually that more academic focused programs were targeted to small groups of students, so they weren't reaching the general high but often allowed students more direct experience with college. And the college knowledge programs tended to be light touch, not last very long, but were able to target large numbers of students. So perhaps they'd have people going into high school classes or perhaps having a college counselor who was available at the high school to work with lots of students. And we also found that there were a number of, a wide range of programs in use. And what I've included here is some of the programs that we saw, along with some of the research that supports their use. So the evidence of effectiveness for each of several models. So dual enrollment, I think most people are familiar with, involves high school students taking college courses. In some cases, they get credit for both college and high school classes. There's some recent research out of the Community College Research Center, actually several different studies, that show that participation in dual enrollment is positively related to earning a high school diploma, to college enrollment, and to persistence in college, as well as a higher college GPA. And that's with rigorous methodologies that control for differences in student characteristics. Another type of model is early college high schools. These are small high schools often located on a college campus or perhaps done in partnership with a college. Middle college high schools are a similar model. There's an experimental study coming out of SERV in North Carolina that's following students in early college high schools as well as control group students. And they found that early college students are more likely to be making progress toward college readiness, so towards some of those interim benchmarks. And those are very encouraging results. The study is fairly early in its trajectory. I think the students are now in 11th grade, so we'll be getting more results from that over time. And then summer bridge programs, we studied those, National Center for Postsecondary Research. We studied a group of bridge programs in Texas. That was also an experimental design study. And we found that participants in the summer bridge programs were more likely to pass their first college level math and writing intensive courses than the experimental control group. We did not find that they were any more likely to progress faster through college. So CTE pathways are another important area. We've talked about how in some cases it's harder to offer career technical education these days. And some of the earlier work, some of you may be familiar with tech prep, which usually had 2 years of high school matched with 2 years of college in a career area. There was a mixed record of effectiveness in terms of college outcomes. But with a more recent study of programs of study, which were pretty much looking at career academy kinds of models, there were some modest positive outcomes that were quite encouraging that had to do with student engagement. But let's see, by the end of 10th grade, students' test scores, academic grade point averages, and progress to graduation tended to be better for students in the programs of study. So that's quite encouraging. Another approach that we've been very interested in has to do with early assessment programs. So that's where a college will go into high schools, offer the college placement test, and inform students of the result. Ideally, the high school would then offer some opportunity for people who'd placed low to improve their skills before they graduated high school. One study of these programs in California by Howell and Kurlander found that just the testing in itself and students having information on their level of college readiness increased the probability that students would place out of remediation. A final intervention I wanted to mention is transition courses. This is something that we're quite interested in and are planning to do some more research on in the coming year. These are courses that are offered during the senior year of high school and developed in cooperation with the college. And the idea is that, perhaps if the two institutions are working together, they can develop a course, say in math or in English, that can make sure that students are meeting the college readiness standards of the college and therefore placing out of remedial education. Okay, just a last note about careers and career choices. So one of the things that we're finding at the college level is that students who come into college and quickly move toward entering a program of study or a major are more likely to graduate. I should say that research is done within the context of community colleges. So students who come in aren't clear what they want to do, often end up wandering around into different courses, not finding a focus, not lighting fire, and they're less likely to graduate. So increasingly people are recommending that it's important for students to leave high school at least with some idea about what they would like to do career-wise. If they can have had that initial assistance while they're in high school, they're more likely to go to college, able to focus in on a major, and more likely to progress toward completion and a credential and the job. So the final area, and this will be a shorter segment. This has to do with measurements, outcomes and measures. We've got one more poll. So should high school should care about how students do on college placement tests? Okay, it looks like most of you think that that high school should care about how students do a lot. Okay, and we have a number on the somewhat category. Nobody on the not at all. Okay, well, thanks for your responses. Let me close that. So I'm going to talk about two questions related to this topic. First of all, how is college readiness currently measured and how valid are those measures? I think a lot of people are concerned with this and wondering about this. And then just for a moment, I want to talk about the higher education perspective on the Common Core assessments. So unpacking college placement tests. So many different tests are in use, and many times students arrive at college and one of the first things that they're told is that they need to take one of those tests, and many times they were not even aware that they existed, and most often don't know that they're being used for relatively high-stakes decisions. So the two most commonly used tests are those developed by the College Board and ACT, Accuplacer and Compass. And usually that one cut score determines whether a student will place into remedial education or not. However, some of the research being done by my colleagues is finding that performance on standardized placement exams is only weakly correlated with course success. So, and a secondary related finding is that not only is it weakly correlated, but if you were to factor in a high school GPA, it would basically wash out any finding from the placement test. So essentially, high school GPA is a better placement device than standardized placement exams. What's even better, though, is the use of multiple measures. So some of the research on this is beginning to get out there, and more colleges are talking about trying to use more than one cut score in placing students. And one of the reasons for that is some accompanying research that is looking at the number of students who are actually misplaced, meaning that they're put into a course for which that just is not the best fit for them given their prior preparation. So the authors of the study, that's Belfield and Crosta, found severe error rates using placement test cutoff scores. The severe error rate for English is 27 to 33%. And with math, it's a lower misplacement rate, but it's still non-trivial. So it's a fairly serious problem that students are being misplaced. However, you know, placement tests have a number of reasons, or basically are used for a number of reasons, perhaps the most important being that, you know, you can do them fairly quickly and fairly cheaply and get students into courses. That's not to say that colleges aren't taking this research seriously and looking at quite a lot of different options. So just a little bit on higher education and the Common Core assessments. We're doing a study on this right now, mainly just looking at what the involvement has been so far in higher education and where it's going. So there didn't seem to be a lot of engagement early on in the process of developing the Common Core standards of higher education, although there certainly were faculty involved in early discussions. But there is a new set of activities that's encouraging much more participation by higher education. It's being supported by foundations. There's a lot of interest in college being more involved. One of the reasons is that for the Common Core standards are considered to be anchored in college and career readiness. And for the most part, I should mention that it seems to be that career readiness is being considered essentially the same as college readiness. But for college readiness, for their definition to have real credibility, it does require that higher education support and lend their imprimatur on this definition. And one way that's being widely discussed that could be done would be to use the 11th grade assessment from the Common Core standards as a real college readiness indicator. So there are discussions around that going on pretty extensively, and it'll be interesting to see where those come out. I won't take any more time on that. I think we're running out of time. Just some final implications of the research that I've discussed. I guess I might call them recommendations or areas to consider. First of all, aligning the core academic program to a clear set of college readiness standards, such as the Common Core. Partnering across P16 lines to advance students' college readiness. Considering offering ways to help students learn about college expectations through some of the programs that I talked about earlier, dual enrollment, early assessment, transition courses, financial aid workshops, and so on. And giving students opportunities to commit to a career area. So, Leslie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. You raised a lot of issues and also shared with us a number of studies. There have been questions, many of the questions for you in this section relate to assessment, which interested me. And you started talking about them, so this might be an opportunity to talk about it a little more, actually. Let's see, I'll pull out a few, but if any of you want to follow up, because some of these questions were written before you got to the assessment and measures part. So let's see, what are the specific implications and findings presented, the findings presented raised in relation, oh no, that's not the one I wanted. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll down here.
Oh, no problem.
So there was a question about the AccuPlacer and how and what research shows about that, which I think you addressed. There's a question about what is the purpose of referencing ACT and SAT when they're not aligned with the Common Core standards, and how does this research that you're presenting differ from and explain Joe's comments about not having research on the Common Core standards?
So one thing that may have been somewhat confusing is when I talked about ACT, it's been as an organization. You know, they, in addition to offering the ACT test, they do quite a lot of their own research. And, you know, you may want to look at their website. So when I have talked about the ACT, it's been referencing studies that they've done. Yeah, none of the research I presented actually referred to their test or the SAT test either. Those do, you know, I guess I could comment that, you know, they do have some predictive value in terms of predicting college success, but it's not necessarily a very strongly predictive of college success either. Both of those tests have definite limitations in terms of the extent to which they predict college success. Now, the second question was.
Well, it was a question about that related your report to Joe's comment about the Common Core standards and they're not being researched. I think, Joe, feel free to jump in here, but I think he was referring to the fact that because the Common Core standards are newly being implemented, there's no research on how they affect college readiness.
Yes, that's exactly what I was referring to. So obviously, right, there's going to be a lag time between the actual implementation of the standards, the identification of measures for the standards themselves, and then some kind of longitudinal analysis of how students, the relationship between how students did on the Common Core standards and then ultimately their success as defined by their ability to, right now, one of the definitions that came up, their ability to you know, succeed in college level courses without remediation. That's going to, you know, I keep jokingly refer to that as a post facto indicator. It's going to take 4 years to determine whether a student succeeds in an entry level course in an accredited institution, an accredited bearing course. That's a rather long way off. I'm still you know, in my mind, one of the issues is, okay, what are the implications of that for 12th grade, 11th grade, 10th grade, so that there are a set of benchmarks along the way, and certainly that's what Smarter Balance and PARC are attempting to do right now, is figure out that relationship. The other thing I would just add is, when people refer to the Common Core at this juncture in time, I want to remind everybody that's about math and English language arts. And clearly, the more in-depth, you know, other content areas and more in-depth content in either of those areas aren't going to really be covered by the Common Core and any assessments that address strictly the Common Core.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
And to build on it, in many ways, we won't know the results of the Common Core for probably 13, 14 years, and that's if they don't change, you know, because, you know, students would need, you know, students who start kindergarten under those systems would be the ones who would, you know, potentially have the most chance to have different outcomes in college. The research that I have seen on the Common Core so far mainly has to do with the extent to which they're being implemented in different states and the ways in which they're being implemented, the kinds of approaches being used.
And then, Elizabeth, here's a question for you that's related to some of the softer skill areas that you talked about, like transition into college and other kinds of problem-solving, broader skills. Are there how do you assess those, both in with that?
Yeah, well, Conley and his group are working with an assessment series that's called CPAS, and it's quite complex and involves students engaged in pretty complex tasks. So it's almost an instructional package along with an assessment package. There are assessments available for some of the measures. You know, you can get critical thinking assessments, you can get learning style assessments, you know, but they're varied, and you know, I wouldn't go out on a limb and recommend any of them, I don't think.
And a last question, a lot of research suggests that those who are, I'm reading here, that those who are slower getting into higher ed or take longer to finish degree programs don't do as well in either finishing or grade levels. This due to a bias by the higher ed system that prefers the traditional 18 to 22-year-old four-year student.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it is.
Well, one thing is that students who've been out of school for a while may need some brushing up. So, you know, it may be that they come in and perhaps haven't used math in many years or haven't done formal writing for a while. And so, you know, they may well benefit from participating in a developmental education course. What many community college faculty will say is that students who've been out for a while are often more serious and, you know, more likely to focus on their education. I'm not sure I know of any study on that, but that's the kind of comment that we hear fairly frequently. So I'm not sure that, I guess I haven't seen any evidence that there's a bias against students who are coming in later. And in fact, community college students, or community colleges in general, have quite a range of ages and backgrounds among their student population. I don't think I mean, that's less the case in four-year colleges. You'd have more traditional age students.
Okay, thanks. I think we are going to turn to Dana now and let him make sense of this if he is back from running his school. This is a sign of what a good principal he is, that he can take this large high school and on the first day things are moving smoothly. Dana is entering his 10th year as principal at Malden High School in Massachusetts. It's a school of 1,800 students and extremely diverse, 30% white students, 22% Asian, 23% black, and nearly 20% Hispanic. More than 200 of those students are English language learners. And he's led a lot of changes at Malden High School, which includes offering 17 advanced placement classes, an alternative program in the school for special education and regular education students. Consists of staggered class times, online courses, career counseling, and internships, and a partnership with Bunker Hill Community College, which was referred to earlier. Dana, I think I will let you respond, and you can just think about this as both someone preparing students for college and careers, and also as somebody thinking about these issues in kind of the transition area.
Leslie?
Dana, are you? Yes, there
I'm
you
here.
are.
I'm here,
Yay.
and I have been here the entire time, so
Oh,
thank you.
Excellent.
And based on all of the questions and comments in the chat room, and based on the presentations, I'm not sure I want to be the high school principal anymore. So this is This is just so fascinating to me as a principal, because if you stay long enough in this business, the pendulum swings one way and then swings back another way. I think it would be best if I just talk about some of the things we're doing at Malden High School and how we think they fit in to the next generation of either assessments or standards, and then let people react to those. Malden High School, we try to make the foundation here at Malden High School for all of our students a solid academic one. So increasing the number of students reading and writing at grade level based on our state tests, increasing our graduation level, offering advanced placement courses, and increasing both the number of students taking advanced placement courses and really addressing underserved students. We want students to leave Malden High School being able to read, write, communicate, and that's no easy task. Some of the things that were brought up in both presentations that we are addressing and that we're trying to expand on, we do have a terrific relationship with Bunker Hill Community College, where we are a satellite campus for Bunker Hill. We offer both day and evening classes at Malden High School with Bunker Hill faculty and Malden High School faculty who serve as adjuncts, and a number of our students take advantage of those courses. They receive both Malden High School credit and Bunker Hill Community College credit. When students come into Malden High School, every freshman visits a college right out of the gate in early October. Our National Get Ahead Day, which is the PSAT day. We have all sophomores and juniors take the PSAT that we pay for. All freshmen go visit a college. All the seniors participate in a college career fair. We have senior internships. We have transition program for grade 8 and 9 students. We've hired a transition coordinator for special education students. We've hired a transition coordinator for post-grad population, for our alternative program, and we have many articulation agreements with community colleges and two-year tech prep programs. So we're addressing many of these issues while at the same time we're trying to adopt to the new Common Core and get ready for PARCC, which is, the next iteration of college-ready determination in ELA and math. So it's very interesting. Sometimes I think about what we have to do in a high school with so many different types of students here. I do worry that sometimes we forget about the different intelligences that students have, and sometimes, when you think about Howard Gardner's work and his multiple intelligences, it's really hard to measure those soft skills, those multiple intelligences, and how those will match up to potential careers or potential college success. But as a high school principal, we have to make sure that we're doing more than just introducing students to solid academic work. We also are trying to keep passions ignited or reignite some passions or create some interest that students will carry with them for the rest of their lives. So that's what we're trying to do at the high school level. There's many more activities I could talk about, but those are just some of the things we're doing here. We really believe it's important to get outside of our comfort zone at Malden High School, and we've created a lot of outside partnerships, which I believe has helped us as a school over the last several years.
So thanks, Dana. It was really interesting to hear the various ways that you're preparing kids for college. I wonder if there are comparable activities or services that you provide that help kids think about careers. Is that something you integrate? Do you focus on college as a preparation for careers, or address that in some other way?
No, I think we do both. We integrate it into what we're doing, but we also realize that there are a number of students who may not choose a 2-year college or a 4-year college right after high school. They may get there eventually, but they may choose to go off to a some type of a technical program or a certificate program right after high school, and we try to ignite those interests. We have a very interesting relationship with a group called Medical Professional Institute, and we have a small number of students who are trying to get their CNA and medical assisting certificates. We, as part of our high school renovation, we built a allied health room within the high school, so we have nursing beds and we have all sorts of nursing equipment so that students can be introduced to that type of work. We've revamped our auto shop. We've revamped our wood shop. We brought in several tens of thousands of dollars invested into a pre-engineering lab where kids are into robotics and doing all sorts of things hands-on. And we're finding that many of the students who are signing up for those programs right now are more career-focused than college-focused, and we support them. We have a large career fair during the year. We're constantly inviting in guest speakers through our business program. Most of our freshmen are taking some type of business requirement. So we are addressing both strands, the college and the career readiness. And I think it's a difficult balance at the high school level, but I think we always fall back to, no matter what we do, we need to make sure students can read and write and communicate.
So here are a couple of questions for you. One is your CTE center or program within your school, or do you have a sister school?
We have, in Malden High School, we have our own auto shop. We have our own high-functioning wood shop construction area. We have our pre-engineering and robotics lab right within the high school. The medical professional room we built within the high school. And so we're trying to do that here. We also have a sister vocational school that's in another district. We're about 60 students a year, freshmen, apply and get into that school and go there for 4 years. But the other 500 freshmen end up at our school, and we find that, you know, those 60 spots aren't enough at that sister vocational school, so we need to offer some things here.
And another question is, how many guidance counselors do you have, and what is their role in helping students target both college and career readiness goals?
Great question. We've changed up our guidance approach over the last couple of years. So what we've done is we have 2 ninth grade counselors now who deal strictly with ninth graders. And so they split the ninth grade class, so they have about 250 students each. And then when the students get into 10th grade, we have a house system where each house has its own assistant principal and its own guidance counselor. So these 2 ninth grade counselors help these ninth grades and for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So having the 2 ninth grade counselors gives ninth graders more support. They do a lot more work going into classrooms on a regular basis, going into English classrooms, history classrooms, health classrooms on a regular basis, talking about both college and career.
Okay, thanks. And here's a last question before we open it up for all of our presenters to discuss. How do you deal with students with high-functioning autism who may not succeed in college without extra support? And what about preparing those students for employment?
Great question. Malden High School is a school over the last several years. We have dedicated many resources to bringing many of our students from outside placement back into the school. So we have many students here who are cognitively disabled, physically disabled on the entire spectrum of autism. And so we've beefed up some of those programs. Again, we've hired a transition internship coordinator just for our special education regular population. We've hired a transition coordinator, intern coordinator for the post-grad 18 to 22 population, and we have a transition coordinator, intern coordinator for the alternative program. So we are very mindful that these students need more skill support. They need more supports when they try to get off to the work world and do internships. So we've adjusted some of our hires and employment over the last couple of years to support those programs.
And a last question. I was going to open it up, but actually, Elizabeth and Joe, why don't you unmute your phones and feel free to jump in, because we have another question about ELL students that I'd like Dana to address, but then we can open it up. We had gotten a lot of questions in advance about students with special needs, including kids with disabilities and English language learners. So this one, Dana, is about do you receive many new arrivals with limited formal schooling? How do you support ELL students, and how do you move these students with limited formal schooling to graduation? About how many do you have?
We probably, out of 1,850 students, we have a little more than 250 students who are classified as ELL. We have many more students who where English is not their first language, but they are not technically in our ESL program. We do see many students come here who have had no or limited schooling in their previous countries. We see that particularly from China. If they're not coming from the eastern part of China, sometimes they get to us at 16 or 17 and they've only had a couple of years of schooling. So, you know, we believe we have a pretty good system in terms of how we deal with our ELL students. We're getting them into double blocks of English. We do an introductory history class, an introductory math class, an introductory biology class. We also give them some electives where they're supported throughout the school. We also have some very creative summer programs where those students are supported. And we're also in the process of writing a grant with Bunker Hill as our partner, to the state through the Gateway City program, where we can receive some funding to enhance those ELL programs for our students, particularly during summer vacation and school vacation. So that is an area where we are mindful that our demographics have shifted dramatically, and we are going to get more and more types of these students, and we need to be ready.
Great, thank you. Joe, I know you've done a lot of work around. Do you want to add some things
I
to
actually
that?
wanted to ask Dana a question based on what he just spoke about, because what he mentioned, the idea of doubling up, this double dosing approach, which is popular for English language learners and students with disabilities, as a way to increase instructional time and provide clearly provide some more personalized attention, and sometimes is combined with a tiered intervention approach. But so it's an effective strategy, but it also creates a little bit of a liability in that double dosing like that creates limits on the amount of credit accumulation that students can get earning, as long as the school's using a Carnegie unit model. It means that there's fewer course opportunities to get those much needed credits. So I was curious ask Dana, as you're using this approach, do you see this as a challenge or as a problem? And if so, how do you address it?
it's absolutely a challenge, and we have forced ourselves to be flexible, and I'll just give you an example. We're dealing with it yesterday and today, as a matter of fact. The students who took the Intro to Life Sciences course last year as ESL students, we had those students take the Massachusetts, the MCAS, the end of the year assessment in biology. And we had those students take the biology assessment based on, the curriculum they had during the school year. And we had a very significant number of those students pass the biology MCAS. Every ninth grader in the school took it. A fairly healthy number of ESL students took it and passed it. And we came up with a cutoff score on that MCAS, and so now we are going back and we are going to credit those students with Biology 1 credit, and we are moving those students now, this week, into their next science course. So they're either going to move into chemistry or solid earth or physics or physical science. Whereas some of the students who took Intro to Life Sciences last year, if they did not pass the biology MCAS, they'll have to take biology this year. So we are mindful that we don't want to jam these students up by making them take all of these intro courses. So if they show us they know the material and they reach a certain threshold, we'll move them into the next course. And that, in many ways, gets the students back on a graduation track, and it really is a motivator for our ELL students.
Thanks. Clearly, the use of this kind of performance-based mastery system instead of seat time accumulation, I mean, it's a great solution to the problem.
We're also using that with some of our repeater students, our ninth grade repeater students, who may be sitting in a history class for the third time, or a math class for the third time, or second time. And we've come up with some interesting ways to assess those kids on our midterm and final exams. And in some cases, the students have done very well, and it was only because of some other issue during their ninth grade first or second attempt that they didn't pass the class. So we've also used that as a motivator, and students have been able to get back on track for graduation.
And Joe, did you want to talk more broadly about some of the strategies you've seen helpful for either children with disabilities or ELL students?
Who is that to?
You.
Oh.
We had a lot of questions about students with disabilities, and I know that you've done work in that area.
And I should let everyone know that in probably early October we'll have a research brief out on college and career readiness in students with disabilities that's being co-developed by the High School Center. Lou Danielson is leading that work on our side, and Betsy Brandt from the American Youth Policy Forum, looking at some suggestions for ways and strategies, some that are research-based and some that are based, obviously, on expert opinion on opportunities. I mean, one of the things that I think we've been talking about internally that we're about to explore, if it's validated by the research, is the continuous use of dual enrollment as a way to allow, especially students with disabilities who may require more than the 4 years to graduate, to allow those students to start taking advantage and working in partnership, local community colleges and the like, to either take dual enrollment courses on the campus of the high school, if indeed accommodations are still required through their AEP, or even to have some transition classes that are offered at the university as a way to kind of ease in to the post-secondary opportunities. I think certainly one of the things that Dana referred to, and that's becoming more and more popular across the board, is looking at opportunities for extended learning time for ELs and students with disabilities, so that there are more after-school opportunities that are more directly tied to the instruction that takes place during the day, and then I think Dana referenced they have some summer activities as well. So those are certainly some strategies that are becoming popular.
Great, thank you. And Elizabeth, do you want to add anything? I know community colleges also have a widely diverse populations.
Yeah, first maybe to the dual enrollment point, there are a number of people that are thinking about dual enrollment as a strategy to help students understand what it's like to do college before they come. And some of our interest has been in ways that students with additional support could be successful in college classes and get that experience of being a college student and kind of learning what that means while they're still supported and have extra help from the high school. So it seems like that has potential to be helpful to a range of students. Yeah, I mean, as far as community colleges go, it's not an area I know a lot about, but I do know that there have been lots of questions about how many students in community colleges have a range of undiagnosed learning disabilities. And for the most part, it seems like a question that's somewhat scary to approach, because it's the kinds of assistance that, you know, just the costs involved with helping students in the range of ways that they might need it is daunting. But it's certainly one of those questions that's out there I'm not aware of much research that's actually been done on that.
Okay, thanks. We are going to close a little early, and I'm going to use one of the participants' questions as a closing, as a question to allow you each to make a closing remark. And that is, if you could totally redesign formal schooling at whatever level you want to think of that, what would you do? What should formal schooling offer to people, and how can formal schooling support and reinforce lifelong school for the day, and then move around the group? So Dana, how would you answer that question?
Well, that is, I would have to give some thought to that question, because I think what's happening is people are answering that question and they're doing that work now, and hence the number of charter schools, the number of pilot schools, the number of Horace Mann schools in Massachusetts, and people are thinking that they have the answer and they're going to, you know, jumpstart a program. I think it's difficult, and as we're finding here, it's difficult at Malden High School to do everything for everybody. And, you know, we took a hit this year in terms of staffing. We had a staffing cut this year, a budget cut, and so we're being asked to do more with less. I do think that, you know, sometimes if you can give students choices and let those choices be fluid, so that students can go from you know, sort of a career focus to a school focus and back, if it can be fluid and not static, that would help. I would also build in a lot more mental health support, a lot more emotional support for our students, a lot more counseling support for our students. I think we're desperately needing that. And I would also build in more business partnerships. I think students should spend weeks, or if not months, away from the school at some point in their four-year career. So I would have to give that more thought, but those are some of the things I would do.
Great. Thank you, Dana.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye, thanks.
For those of you who are participants as people are leaving, please take the evaluation survey that I've put up on the screen. It will only take about 5 minutes, and you can do that at your leisure. And then I want to turn it to, let's have Elizabeth start. So your big picture question about redesigning formal schooling.
Well, this is a hard one to do on the fly.
I know.
But it's a great question. So let me just put out a few things from my wish list. So one is that we, rather than having these separate systems of K-12 and post-secondary education, that we have one system that works for all of our students. That, that rather than competing for funds, many times they come through different channels, rather than, casting blame, across the barriers, that everybody basically say, okay, we're all here for students. We want to prepare them all and make sure they all, receive the kind of preparation they need for life and careers. So that's number one. Number two would be assuming that for the most part, every student is going to have a career, and most students are going to need some post-secondary education. So rather than saying that there's a, this track for career students, that track for college students, for the most part, we assume that, whatever your career is, whether it's being an engineer or being an auto tech, that you're going to need a set of skills that includes, being able to read really well and problem solve and have some basic math, and, may require more or less years and so on a post-secondary, but that, that just be kind of the frame that we work with. So basically careers for all and some post-secondary education, at least as an option for all. And that ties to the idea of relevance. So I think there are lots and lots of students who just don't see why they're in school. I mean, we've been saying that for a long time, and I think it continues. So to the extent that students can at least be playing with careers and, thinking about ways to apply what they do, or, to do it through arts or other kinds of applications. I think to the extent we can provide those opportunities, that's great. And I really like what Dana suggested in terms of having students make connections with businesses or employers, or be out in businesses and employers. And there are all sorts of reasons why that's hard to do, but it can be done. So another area we've been talking a lot about is that special programs, such as, for example, summer bridges that I mentioned, a lot of times they can be good, but they serve small numbers of students and they take a lot of energy. So, what are the kinds of changes we can make to institutions that make it easier for students in general? So, one of those kinds of changes we've talked about is at the college level, helping students find their way into career pathways earlier, career and or college major pathways. I mean, again, thinking in terms of everybody as having a career. And, when students do find their way into those pathways, they tend to have better outcomes. That's kind of a full college change as opposed to a specific, more specialized program type change. And the last one I might mention is that a lot of reform efforts are kind of circling around the outside of many students' experiences. So most students are spending most of their day in the classroom. And there's only a certain number of reform efforts that really are about supporting teachers, supporting faculty, in providing all the kinds of help that they would wish to or can and need to be prepared for. So making sure that we're really giving full focus and resources to the classroom is the final one.
Thanks. And Joe, you get the you're lucky. You had the most time to think, and you get the last word.
But I can very easily just say I agree with everything that everybody said, and there's nothing new. But let me just raise a couple points real quickly. The first thing I would do is invent a special pill that I'd give to all the parents in the world, in the States, that would enable them to forget what their high school experience or their K-12 experience was like, so that they didn't try to replicate it or challenge when we try to do things a little bit differently now, that they want their children to experience high school and public education exactly as they experienced it many, many years ago. So that'd be my number one step. Then based on that, I would take a serious look at rethinking time, how we structure the day, how we structure the year, the summer, etc. Space, how we congregate groups of students, for what purpose, and why it's in a particular location, and ways we could avoid that, expand that. Content, because I think when I showed at one meeting my father's transcript from 1932, it was almost identical to my transcript from the 70s, and then to my son's transcripts from the 90s. And so I'd be thinking about why we're wedded to a particular sequence of courses and content area. And then lastly, I'd be totally rethinking the instructional delivery systems. Who should teach, how they should teach, what they should teach, what should be the role of technology, what should be the role of content experts that fall outside of the current definition of a highly qualified teacher. And then the difficult challenge would be to have some serious conversations about the role of the the cultural role of the education system, not just on the individual student level, but on the social level within a community. So thinking about athletics, the role of athletics, the socialization opportunities for students as they move into young adulthood, through adolescence, and then the frequent role of some school systems or many school clusters to serve as a babysitting option, to allow parents to be able to pursue other opportunities for employment and the like, and to ensure that their children are in a safe environment. So I think it's more than just the instructional part. It's and how kids learn. It's the whole gamut of everything that we do, I think, should be put up for question, and we need to discuss what we need to keep, why we need to keep it, and what alternatives. And I agree certainly with Dana and Elizabeth that we need to continue to explore options that work for different types of students in different types of contexts. So I think the final thing I would want to make sure we do is that we just really focus on breaking down silos. The silos within the existing high school structure, between elementary, middle, and high school, between the public education system and the higher education system, and everything in between. Breaking down silos and thinking about how we can talk about doing things differently would be a very important step in my plan for reinventing reinventing education as we call it now.
Thanks, Joe. And I'd encourage all of you who are participants to be thinking about that question for yourselves. I think the participants and the presenters have given all of us a lot to think about, both with the information that the presenters presented and with the questions that participants raised. So I thank you all for your engagement. We want to keep in touch with you, so please feel free to contact us if you would like to continue to be in touch with the College and Career Readiness Research Alliance. And our website is here, so you can continue to look there, and the archive of this webinar will be on that website. You can share that with colleagues and friends and continue to be in touch with us. And the PowerPoint, it will also be on there and is below in the bottom left-hand corner that you can download. We will be sending out references for many of the things that were mentioned in today's webinar, and we encourage you to keep in touch with us with your questions over the year. Thank you for your participation, and goodbye.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and thanks to Aubrey, and thank you as well to the production team today. Chantel Darrow was the technical producer, Ashley Gaddis was the audio producer, and an archive of this webinar will be emailed to all the registrants in about a week's time. Thank you very much from the Regional Educational Lab, Northeastern Islands.